A few announcements before we dive into the awesome topic that you all came here for. So we do have our own Facebook group as well. It's kind of small still, but we are getting started. So if you go on Facebook and you just go, it's either facebook.com/groups/WordPress.accessibility, or you can search WordPress accessibility. There is a Facebook group that you can join if you want to just talk like accessibility and WordPress. We have live captions today. This is our second meetup with live captions. We are super excited. I will talk a little bit more about our sponsor in just a minute, but huge thank you to Leanne Stafford for sponsoring captions for this event. We are working on ASL interpreters. We've reached out to a few different organizations that are approved through the state of Texas, since that's where we're located, because we wanted to make sure that we got someone who is going to do it right. And I think we're still waiting to get some quotes for them. And we have reached out to a pretty big number of companies to see if any of them would be interested in that. So our goal, of course, is we love to have live captions and ASL interpreters on every meetup. So we're doing our best on that front. Beyond those items, if you ever have any suggestions for the meetup, if there's a topic that you would like to hear about, or if you have any ways that we can make the meetup work better for you, please feel free to contact either Emma or myself, and I'm Amber. And you can email us at equalizedigital.com. So I'm Amber at equalizedigital.com, and Emma is Emma at equalizedigital.com. I stuck our logo there so you can see it. And you can also reach us through the meetup page as well, but I know sometimes that doesn't work as well for people on screen readers. So if there's anything we can do to make this work better for you, or make the recordings work better for you after the fact, please do feel free to reach out and let us know. So our sponsor today is Leon Stafford. Leon is a developer at Static and the creator of WP2 Static, which is a plugin that, or a tool that helps people build static WordPress sites. He also maintains the accessible minimalism theme for Hugo, which is a different content management system, and he's in the process of porting that over to WordPress. So looking forward to having another possible starter theme that is accessible in WordPress environment. Leon thinks that accessibility is one of the most important goals of technology, but also one of the hardest to get developers and stakeholders to care about. So he just wanted to thank all of the champions in the accessibility space. So if you aren't familiar with it, that A11Y stands for accessibility. It's our short way of writing accessibility on Twitter when we have limited characters. And he wants to thank everybody who's here just for becoming aware of its importance. If you want to learn more about Leon and some of his projects and works that he does, his website is ljs.dev. I have it there at the bottom. And the other thing that I always like to ask is, if you are so willing and you have a Twitter account, after the meetup, go on Twitter, and if you can just tweet a thank you, I like to say, to our sponsors. I think it shows them like this really does matter. What you did makes a difference, and hopefully it encourages them to sponsor more captions again in the future. So he, on his handle on Twitter, is ljs.dev, all written out, which you can see right there. So our upcoming events on Monday, October 18th at 5 p.m. Pacific, or if you're like me and you live in Central Time, it's going to be 7 p.m. Central Time. We will have Nick Croft, who is a developer at Reactive, which is a WordPress VIP agency that does a lot of enterprise level WordPress builds, sharing best practices for screen reader text. So this will be a combination of what it should be like text and writing it, but also we'll get to see a little bit more of the code side. How can you actually improve or code in screen reader text in certain places? So from a developer perspective, this will also be a good meetup, but I think that even if you're not a developer, you will have some big takeaways as well. And then after that, on Thursday, November 4th at 8 a.m. Pacific or 10 a.m. So this same time slot on November 4th, we're going to have Brian Gardner, who you may know him as the original founder of the Genesis themes and Studio Press. He has a new theme out called Frost WP, and he recently rejoined WP Engine. And he's going to be talking about his transition to building themes with accessibility in mind, because that's something that he's been putting a lot more effort and thought into. So both of these should be really great, exciting meetups, and I look forward to seeing you all there as well. So what you came here for today, I'm so excited to introduce Colleen. I've had the opportunity to hear her speak at some other events and also see, you know, comments and advice and information that she's shared in various Facebook groups. And she's also a member of the IAAP, the International Association of Accessibility Professionals. And so I really value everything she has to say. So I was so excited when she agreed to come speak. So Colleen is an award-winning designer. She has over 25 years experience in branding, print, web design, and development. And she also is an accessibility specialist that does InDesign accessibility training and design accessibility training. So she's done that to the US Department of Interior at the Creative Pro InDesign Plus Accessibility Summit, and has appeared on several podcasts and given presentations, as I mentioned, about website accessibility as well. So Colleen, I'll let you take over sharing and introduce yourself any further that you would like to do, but we're so happy to have you here and looking forward to your presentation.
Well, thank you. Those were really nice comments. I appreciate that, especially coming from you.
Yeah.
So yeah, I have two businesses. I have a consulting business, Gratzer Graphics, that I started in 2003, and it was just design and web and print, like pretty much everything design except as accessibility, which I didn't get into until 2016, which was a game changer. And I have a second business, Creative Boost, where I put out the Design Domination podcast, and then I have I offer mentoring, and I also have accessibility courses for designers and also for web designers and developers specifically. So I'm actually really excited to talk about this. Well, I'm always excited to talk about accessibility, but I'm really excited about talking about this because so many designers and developers ignore accessibility, and so do their clients. And so I just want more people to understand and know about it and how it actually can benefit them, instead of thinking about like, oh, it's a thorn in my side, or oh, I have to do this or have to do that. So let me see if I can go ahead and share my screen.
While you're getting that queued up, do you have a preference on, do you want everyone to save questions at the end? If I see something in the chat, do you want me to chime in? How do you like to handle questions?
Probably at the end.
Sounds good.
I'm just trying to figure out, okay, why this is showing with bookmarks. Okay, do you see?
Yep, we can see the slides.
Okay, I'm just seeing on my book, my little tabs too, though. So let me see if I did something wrong with that when I shared it. Nope, I guess that's just how it's going to show. Okay. All right, so you just see, you don't see my speaker notes, you just see that screen, right?
Yeah, we don't see your speaker notes. We can see the slides, but that's it.
Okay. Not that they're covert or anything, but.
Yes, we can also see all your little Firefox or Chrome, whatever they are add-ons.
Right, right. Okay, so how ignoring accessibility costs you and your clients. So even if accessibility is not a legal requirement for your clients, ignoring it can still cost them and you. So to start off, I want to take a look at some of like the state of the web when it comes to accessibility, some statistics. 98% of the top 1 million websites fail a basic test of accessibility. This is what WebAIM found when they tested the top ranking 1 million websites. And this is crazy, right? Because these are just things that can be detected with an automated checker, which can only detect like usually 25 to 30% of issues, some more and some do less and some do more or less on certain sites. So this is really astonishing. And to give you an idea too, I recently did a website audit that ended up being 120 pages, and an automated checker found only a couple types of errors that were in my report. And the manual checking that I did was actually the bulk of that audit, and it was about 1 issue per page. So we're talking about over 100 issues. Now, in these tests, WebAIM found an average of almost 61% or almost 61 accessibility errors per page. And the number of errors has only been increasing over time. So it's not getting better, it's actually getting worse. When it comes to pages with ARIA, ARIA is code that you add that provides extra meaning and usability for users of assistive technology. Well, when it's used properly, that is. And WebAIM found that 60% of pages with ARIA actually had more errors than pages without ARIA. So in other words, developers might have used ARIA incorrectly, or they added it where they shouldn't have. And a lot of times what happens is they think they need to add ARIA and they overdo it, and they actually cause more accessibility issues. Not all websites need to have ARIA in order to be accessible. One of the most common WCAG2 failures that WebAIM found was low contrast text. And this was found on 86% of pages. So that means that users with low vision or color blindness may not be able to read the text. Well, heck, not only them, but I don't even have a visual disability, and I can't read text like white on a yellow or light blue background, and I come across that all the time. And then alternative text was missing on images from 66% of pages. And 9.3% of these images that had alt text had questionable or repetitive alt text. So they might have had alt text that had like a file name instead of what it was describing, or maybe it said dog instead of cat, or maybe it had something that was redundant. So that means that users of screen readers didn't get the proper content from those images. Empty hyperlinks were found on almost 60% of pages. And a lot of times, these are social media icon fonts or they're SVGs that don't have any link text. So sighted users can see the icon, but someone using a screen reader has no idea what it is. So this means that the purpose of that link isn't understood, and it's just confusing, or somebody misses out on that content. Form input labels were missing on almost 54% of pages. So that means that users of screen readers may not know what a text field or checkboxes or radio buttons are for. They don't understand the text that's with them, where it goes with that particular field. Or they might go to select a field, like maybe they go to select a tiny checkbox and they cannot precisely select it because they have a motor disability. And so labels help with that too, not just comprehension, but also in case someone has a motor disability. Empty buttons were found on almost 29% of pages. So users of screen readers may not know what the button on the form is for, right? So there could be more than one button. Maybe it's not just a submit button. Maybe there's also a reset button next to it. If they hit the reset button, all their information's gone, and that's really frustrating. And then 28% of pages were missing a set document language. So why does any of this matter? Why do any of these stats matter at all? Especially because maybe you have never encountered issues on a website, or maybe your clients haven't gotten any complaints. It must not be that big of a deal, right? But maybe you also think these issues only affect a small minority of people. But that's not the case. And this all matters because 1 billion people in the world have a disability, which is about 15% of the population. And actually in the US, it's about 20%. So I want to go over some of these disabilities and how our web designs and how we code can actually affect them. Okay, so visual disabilities. Now, I've found that many web designers and developers and their clients think that accessibility is all about designing for people with blindness or for users of screen readers. Or they think accessibility is about older people. And a lot of times if they do any accessibility testing at all, they're only testing with a screen reader, or they ask someone with blindness to go through the site with a screen reader. But someone who has blindness and goes through the site with a screen reader, they won't know if they're missing out on content. And that's also visual disabilities other than blindness that are much higher in number. like you've got color blindness, which affects 1 in 12 males, and some women, a smaller percentage of women, and then low vision, which could be caused by macular degeneration or a diabetic retinopathy or a cataract. Individuals with blindness might use a screen reader such as VoiceOver on the Mac or NVDA or JAWS on Windows, or they might use a Braille keyboard. But for them to be able to access information, the site has to be built with the proper code, and then the content has to be formatted correctly to allow the assistive technology to access that information and get around the site. So all those errors I previously mentioned, those would all be a huge problem for them. And some individuals with low vision might use a screen reader, but many don't. I have a friend with legal blindness who doesn't use any assistive technology. And most users with color blindness don't use assistive technology. They don't use a screen reader. So low contrast is a really huge issue. And if people can't read the text on the website and they can't distinguish hyperlinks on the page from body text, that's a huge design fail. Now, there's auditory disabilities, deafness, and partial hearing loss. And some elements of a website that affect these individuals are captions and transcripts. So if a site has any audio or video content that doesn't have a text alternative, these users can't access that content. But the majority of people who use captions actually don't have hearing loss. They might be somebody in a crowded room. I mean, the other day I was watching a video on YouTube and I couldn't hear part of it because my husband was mowing really loudly by the house by my office. So I just turned on the captions so I could understand what they were saying. But they're also used by people who aren't native speakers of a language. And they also help people understand someone that might have a speech impediment and be speaking. And then ambulatory or mobility or motor disabilities, that's another group. And this could include people with chronic arthritis, someone who has a lost limb, Parkinson's, multiple sclerosis, muscular dystrophy, cerebral palsy, stroke, even like traumatic brain injury or a broken arm. And yes, I say a broken arm because a disability could be something temporary. It's not necessarily something that someone is born with, and it's not necessarily something permanent. And many of these individuals can't use a mouse. And so instead, they need to use the keyboard, or they could use a screen reader, or a touch screen, or a sip and puff system where they breathe into something that communicates to the computer. There's also a joystick and a trackball and a wand and stick, or a hands-free pointing device. So we're not just talking about even the mouse and screen reader, so many other types of assistive devices. Another category is cognitive learning and neurological disabilities, Down syndrome, dementia, dyslexia, autism, ADHD, seizure disorders, and memory loss. And these individuals might be affected by contrast, and not necessarily just low contrast, but too much contrast. And the use of certain colors, or the use of certain colors together, can actually cause issues in people who've had a traumatic brain injury, or people with dyslexia. It actually can, certain color combinations can actually enhance or hinder comprehension. But also we're talking form instructions and noting required fields on forms. And then individuals with seizure disorder, like epilepsy, they could actually suffer a seizure as a result of flashing, blinking, or other types of motion. And if you're ever looking to talk a client out of like a slider or a carousel, there's like your best reason to do that. That's your best ammo for that. But screen readers aren't just for those with low vision or blindness. Individuals who have a cognitive or learning disability actually might use a screen reader to voice content on the page. Some people, like I'm a visual person, I prefer to read, I comprehend things better that way. A lot of people, when they hear things, they comprehend better than they do seeing something in writing. Okay, so how does ignoring accessibility affect you and your clients, or even affect your clients, or even cost them? Okay, so the first way is revenue. Let's look at a few statistics here. Okay, in the US, people with disabilities have a total income of about $873 billion and a disposable income of $645 billion. Okay, so 71% of users with a disability leave a website that's not accessible. And where do you think that they're going to go? They're going to go to a competitor site that might be accessible. And who knows if they'll return to your client's site again? They might not. When they say it takes like 8 times, I think, to make up 8 positive impressions to make up for 1 bad impression. Okay, so some situations that you could consider about how having an inaccessible website could cost your client revenue. So you could have a veteran who's lost both of his hands and he uses an assistive device with his computer, and say he goes to that site and he wants to make a donation, but he can't get to the donation page because the navigation isn't accessible. And if it were, he could use his device or tab through from the keyboard. You could have a legally blind woman who wants to make a donation to an animal rescue, but she finds it hard to read the small light gray text on the website. And she doesn't use a screen reader, so she zooms in on the text in the browser. But maybe it's still too light for her to read, so she just gives up and leaves the site feeling frustrated. You might have a man with color blindness who's shopping for a gift online, and he's unable to make out the hyperlinks to the products because to him, they don't look any different from the body text. So there's no additional styling to show that they're hyperlinks. So he leaves and he goes to a competitor site where it's much easier to make a purchase. You could have a woman with full hearing loss who goes to watch a how-to video on the site for a product that she wants to purchase. Let's say there's no captions or explanatory text on the webpage though. So she doesn't understand how the product can help her. So your client just lost another sale. Are you still seeing only my screen? Because some notice just came up that I've never seen before.
Yeah, we didn't get any notice.
Oh, okay, that was weird. Ignoring accessibility negatively affects a business's reputation, because when clients don't consider 20% of their website visitors, it comes across as we don't care about being inclusive. There's a great saying by Ekaterina Walter of Forbes: if we do not intentionally include, we will unintentionally exclude. So this will give the business a negative reputation. Not only that, but people with a disability are 3 times as likely to avoid that business, and they're twice as likely to dissuade others from doing business with it. And we all know how much word of mouth and reviews on Facebook from anybody, people with or without a disability, we all know how those reviews, how much impact they can have. So they can either really help or they can really hurt a business. A lot of sites in general are bloated with code and slows them down, and that can affect search engine rank. And accessible sites can actually rank higher because they're using proper semantic tags and code that isn't bloated. And so leaner website code results in faster page load times, and the site could actually get a boost in Google search results because of that. And ranking higher than a competitor could be the edge to get that sale or that donation. So accessibility is also about properly formatted content, and that means that search engines might actually provide more relevant content from an accessible site in their search results. So that could mean that someone's going to click through and stay on the site longer because that actually was information that they were looking for. Now, we all know about potential legal issues being another problem with ignoring accessibility. Of course, this is a huge issue in the US, as we saw from that. Everyone's always talking about an admin bar. It comes up, and like that thread yesterday, everybody was, looking at that one, where someone had gotten the letter about a lawsuit for their client. So what happens is that, well, these claims can be like 1,000 to 100,000. But Amber, you shared something yesterday in that group saying that you've seen amounts as high as $350,000. And most businesses just end up writing a check. This is the cost for legal fines and fees for both parties. And this also, because I think a lot of web designers and developers, they get panicked when this happens, but I think maybe their clients think, okay, well, now that this has happened, we just have to fix it. And no one else is going to come around and sue us again. And so we have time to fix it. Even a judge could say you have 6 months to a year to fix it, but you don't want to wait around because somebody else could come along, a different plaintiff could come along and sue. So, but the other thing is it also doesn't relieve them from remediating, which means fixing the site to make it accessible. It doesn't relieve them from that obligation to do that. So if that happens, you have to get it fixed right away. The business is not off the hook. They can't just like, okay, we got sued, we can just take our time. So here's a few examples of accessibility laws in the US, and the UK, Canada, and Australia. So in the US, we have Section 508 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, which is a federal law that applies to the government and its contractors. And then we have the Americans with Disabilities Act, which applies to, I think, some organizations in the public sector, but private entities as well. And then in the UK, there's the Equality Act 2010. And then in Canada, the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act, also called AODA. And then Australia has the Disability Discrimination Act. Now there's laws in other countries too. We hear the most about US and Canada, I think, but there are laws in other countries and people just aren't aware that those laws have been in place for a very long time. Okay, so remediation is another cost to consider. It is much more costly to remediate a website and the documents on it, because those have to be remediated too, when accessibility is an afterthought, okay, than it is to incorporate it into the design process and into the development or into your document layout as you go. And some websites and documents I've remediated can cost 3 times as much as they might have if I had been hired to do it from the beginning, rather than being handed like the files or the site after the client had approved everything that someone else did. So you're going back and you're revisiting the design process all over again. So the client has approved a design, now it's got to be redone. And an audit of a website can easily cost a couple to several $1,000s. And then there's also, do they want a desktop audit? Do they want a mobile audit? Do they want both types of audits? And then there's the cost of a developer to fix those issues. And then after that, there's the cost of a follow-up audit to make sure that changes were made correctly by the developer and to make sure that no new mistakes were made in the process. So like I said, documents on a website also need to be remediated. And a lot of times when I'm remediating InDesign and PDF files for accessibility, I have to modify the client's color palette or modify the design in order to get colors to work. Keeping the original colors maybe, but changing how they're used. So this is an example of that. And you can see these are very different looking. So it's the same with a website. Changing a design after the fact is really costly and time consuming because again, you're revisiting the design process. So it's like the client is paying for the design work twice. And then the client has to, of course, review the new look, and that's going to add additional time that they probably hadn't planned on. Remediation, though, is not just a financial cost. It can also affect brand recognition if the branding doesn't take into consideration accessibility during the process. And color plays a huge part in that. You know, will your client lose business as a result of the design or the color changes that don't keep in mind the branding, since some people may not immediately recognize that branding with those changes? I mean, think about McDonald's. What if the golden arches were changed to brown in order to meet contrast requirements? That's totally different looking. Now, here's an example of what I mean with one of my websites. The branding of my consulting business uses a light green and gray as the 2 main colors. And purple is what I wanted to use more of as an accent color. The green heading that you see in the first screenshot, that's actually after I had darkened it. And it still does not meet contrast requirements. And it actually would have had to be a much different, darker hue of green, like an army green. And that would have, nothing's wrong with army green, but that would have just changed my brand color palette and the brighter look that I really wanted the overall design to have. And I rebranded like a year before I got into accessibility. So, you know, I didn't know about any of this stuff at the time. So, you know, addressing color and contrast issues in the branding stage is vital. And it doesn't stop there, because you don't want the client's website to be accessible with a modified color palette, but then all their other materials use their original non-accessible color palette, you know, because then they won't be consistent. And that really affects the integrity of their visual branding that they've invested in. Okay, so now let's get into how ignoring accessibility can cost you. Okay, I have a lot to say on this one. Okay, reputation. When you don't address accessibility in the design process, and I or someone else has to make the design accessible, the client will ask why the original designer didn't bring this up, why they didn't know about it. And when you don't build an accessible website, you might as well tell a client, well, hey, I'm going to build you a website, but is it okay if only like 80 to 85% of people are able to use it? I'm sure you wouldn't want to say that to them, right? I mean, you're automatically starting out by excluding people right off the bat. When a client has to spend more time and money on making their branding and their documents and their website accessible, they're not going to be happy about that. Okay, but that doesn't make you look good either. And it's our job to inform clients about this. You know, you probably tell them about SSL and why they need to have that. And you might tell them about privacy policies and why they need to have those, but you're probably not telling them about accessibility. And even if you don't understand it all or know what to do, you're doing yourself a huge disservice by not bringing it up. If the client brings it up first, they're going to wonder why you did it. But it also puts you in an order taker position because you're the web designer or the developer. And like I said, even if you don't know everything about accessibility, you should be bringing it up, not waiting for them to do it. That's what they're looking to you for, that guidance. So you can always say, like, I don't know anything about this, but I'm going to hire it out. You know, I don't know anything about SEO and I don't pretend to, and I don't want to get into that. If somebody needs SEO, okay, I'm going to refer it out. You know, it's the same kind of thing. Another way ignoring accessibility can cost you is losing out on projects. Like I said earlier, this accessibility has been a game changer for my business. I've been in business since 2003. Nothing has affected my business more, had more impact than adding accessibility to it. There's a gazillion web designers and developers out there. And if you're not niched, it's especially hard to stand out. And this is one way you can do that. You know, and maybe you lose out on potential projects because prospects don't see how you're different from the next web designer or developer or even agency. So they base their decision on price. You know, the lowest price, like that person never wins. It's always a race to the bottom line. So accessibility can help you stand out and win more work. I mean, it's helped me. Like I said, one of my course students recently just won 2 jobs and possibly a third because he brought up the topic. And even if the client doesn't ask for accessibility, if another developer or agency brings it up and you don't, they will probably get that work instead. That's what I see happen all the time. So the thing to keep in mind is that accessibility isn't going away. It's been around for much longer than you're probably aware of, and it's only becoming more prevalent and getting more attention. And clients are starting to ask for it more and more. Now, on the legal side of things, there's potential things that could happen to you. The number of web accessibility lawsuits almost tripled from 2017 to 2018. And some web developers and even hosting companies have been sued. And in one case, someone sued the Wet Willie's bar chain because their website wasn't accessible. And the plaintiff, who was a user with blindness, he said he wasn't able to access their menu online. He sued not only the bar chain, he also sued the web developer and the host because he said they were the creator and operator of that website. Another case is one that I heard about from a colleague who does accessibility audits, and his client was sued and then went after the developer because the developer didn't bring it up. So they went after the developer looking to recoup some of their legal fines and fees. And again, we're talking about anywhere from $1,000 to like $350,000. And I've also heard personally from several web developers directly whose clients got sued, and then they go into a panic and they're like, well, what am I supposed to do about this now? It's not just like, you know, big companies. Accessibility is essential for some, but it is useful for all. Instead of looking at accessibility like it's a thorn in your side or putting your head in the sand and hoping your clients don't get, you know, randomly plucked out from the crowd for a lawsuit, look at what it can do for not only the users, but also your clients and you. There's just so many ways that accessibility adds value. And it provides a better experience for all users. You know, most people won't notice that a site is accessible. but they will appreciate the benefits. And this reminds me of when I had an apartment years ago. The only available unit was one that was wheelchair accessible. And I didn't need that, but they gave that to me because that's what they had. And I loved it. I had extra wide doorways, which I need because I have really broad shoulders and I'm constantly banging my shoulders on doorways. I'm very clumsy. It had a bigger walk-in closet, which I loved, and I had a huge bathroom. So that was really, really cool. Accessibility makes for a better user experience. So that can be faster page load times on websites because of the leaner code, and those people are more likely to stay on the site. There is the ability to easily scan a page to find the information they need quickly, because most people, we do not just get on a web page and read everything, top to bottom. We get on there and we look at headings and we scan down for headings, and screen reader users can do the same thing when that content is properly formatted. There's also the enhanced readability due to good typography and color choices, and clearly distinguishable hyperlinks when you want people to take action. And then forms that they can fill out without having to have this precision to select something to fill them out. And the ability to read captions and transcripts, which serves so many purposes. You could be in a room with kids playing and trying to hear the audio. Like I said earlier, your husband could be out mowing right in front of your office. You could be in a loud coffee shop and having trouble hearing the audio. If you're not a native speaker of that language and you're seeing the words, maybe that helps you understand what they're saying. And it can also help you understand the speaker who might not be a native speaker, like a person with a heavy accent. And again, like I mentioned earlier, someone that might have a speech impediment and they're speaking. There's also the ability to use the keyboard. I'm a big fan of using the keyboard. I love using the keyboard. I don't have to pick up my mouse. I'm not going to do it. I mean, even if you're just using the keyboard, like in this picture of this woman holding a child in her lap, even if she's, maybe her right hand isn't her dominant hand and she's, she's using the mouse, but, if you're tabbing on the keyboard. So all of these things make for a better user experience for all users. And the other thing to think about is that if someone likes being on your client's site and they have a good experience, they're more likely to come back. They're more likely to stay on the site longer. And they're also more likely to say good things to others. So I just want to recap a few points. 98% of the top 1 million websites fail a basic test of accessibility. Again, totally astonishing. There's a ton of work to be done in this space. You can start building better websites that get more results for your clients. Automated checkers only detect about 25% to 30% of issues. They're a good start, but they're not a catch-all. And I know a lot of web designers and developers out there think if you pass that automated checker, that's all you need to do. And that is not the case. 1 billion people, or 15% in the world, have a disability. Ignoring accessibility can cost your clients revenue, reputation, search engine rank, potential legal issues, remediation costs, and brand recognition. And it can cost you reputation, projects, and potential legal issues. And another point is that accessibility is not a destination, it's a journey. So you're not going to come out of the gate knowing everything there is to know about it. There's so much to know about it. There's even, there's people that do only documents. There's people that do only websites. There's people that do only apps. There's people that only do ARIA. I mean, there's so many different subsections of accessibility, and just doing something and just getting started is so much better than doing nothing and afraid you're going to get it wrong, or hope that your client doesn't get sued. So if you want to learn more about accessibility, my website is creative-boost.com. And that's where my podcast episodes are. I have a ton of free accessibility information there. And I have 3 free guides on it. And like I said, I have courses. And then I have a consulting business, gratzergraphics.com. And we do accessible branding. And we do accessible publication design and websites. And also remediation and website audits.
Well, thank you. We had some good conversation in the chat, which I know when you're speaking, it's hard to
I had to
watch
turn it
that.
off.
So yeah, let me recap a few things, and then we do have some questions. So Peter mentioned that he had actually
Yes.
worked at a company
Mhm,
that was sued under the ADA for not having an accessible website.
mhm.
So
Several
it does
years-
happen to real people. Do you want to share any thoughts about that, Peter?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, so this is actually several years ago, before accessibility was even a hot topic among
Mhm.
companies. But we're talking about a large site, e-commerce site, and it was sued under the ADA for lack of accessibility. We just didn't basic things like alt tags and images. We had text that was too small, too close together. I mean, these are things that you should be doing for everyone, not just people with disabilities, right? And one of my pet peeves is not making it clear on a page what's clickable and what's not.
Yeah.
Not a matter of hyperlinks. A lot of times people design components that look clickable and are not, or they have clickable elements that are not called out as clickable, or they have design signals that confuse the two. So that's one of my pet peeves and you can see clearly if you install a software, a program like Crazy Egg or Hotjar on your site, it'll amaze you how many frustration clicks there are on a site that you think is primo, right? And yet people are not just disabled people, but everyone has trouble figuring out what they should click on and what they shouldn't.
Yes.
Yeah, for people who don't know, Hotjar, I'm familiar with that, does screen recordings. I'm assuming Crazy Egg does the same thing. Is that right, Peter?
It's very much like it's very much like Hotjar. It does a lot of the same things. So it gives you heat maps and videos of pages. And so whenever we redesign a page, I put Hotjar on it to make sure that it's performing the way we expect it to. And what we've found is that another pet peeve is very small click targets, right? So you might have a huge graphic at the top of your page, and everyone does this. I mean, I trust me, 9 times out of 10 people just scroll right past that graphic and get to the content, right? But you might have a huge graphic at the top and a tiny button to get more information. People be clicking on the graphic and the text next to the graphic, and they'll entirely miss that button in a lot of cases, right? So you should design sites with larger targets, especially as we move to, traffic moves to mobile, right? The small targets are really hard for people to hit. And a lot of times they're not called out at all in any meaningful way.
Yeah. So Mark also added, following up on your comment in the chat, he wrote that another one is that thing to keep in mind, I think, is that people with disabilities can design and develop accessible websites. Hence the importance of making the operating system and authoring tools accessible as well. I don't know if you have any thoughts about that, Colleen.
It's interesting because I just came across an article the other day where there was a man who became blind at the age of 4 after a neighbor with a mental disorder threw acid on his face. So he was burned and he was totally blind from that. And he just won, I forget the name of the award. I could send you the link if you wanted to send it out, but he just won an award for building, I forget exactly what it was. So it was an accessible, it wasn't an app, it was some other kind of accessible platform. So it was really interesting.
Yeah, that's cool. And on that note, I mean, we did have Taylor Arndt on. She was a speaker a couple months ago, and she talked about WordPress plugins. So if you're a plugin developer, if we have any of those here, and some of the challenge that she's experienced as a blind person using a screen reader, building a website in WordPress with some of the back end of some of the plugins. So I think for sure, and that's something we are trying to continually improve in our own plugin and tool, like making sure that the back end is accessible. I mean, ours doesn't output anything on the front end, so it doesn't really impact the front end at all, but making sure they can be used by everyone is important. Let's see. So Colleen, there was a question from Dave. Said you briefly mentioned that certain color combinations are a problem for people with dyslexia. Could you please explain more about this?
Yeah, so there are certain color combinations that are problematic that can hinder comprehension, and there's some that can actually help with comprehension. So there's quite a few of them. I remember them being like a light yellow for the background and an almost black for the text, like a dark gray. And
That's
think
helpful, or that one's not good?
that one is helpful. From what I remember, it was the light yellow and some warmer colors that they gave. There was a study and they gave these specific hex codes for these certain colors, but it was mostly like a dark gray, almost black for the text, and then these warmer colors for the background. But I think a very light blue was okay as well. But there were a lot of the cooler colors that weren't so great. But too high of a contrast can also be problematic for people with Erlen syndrome. Stark black and white, for example, the highest level of contrast that you can achieve, that actually can make them see text as like wavy or moving or blurry, all these different ways, except how it actually looks to someone else on the page. It can actually prevent them from being able to read the content. And then like saturated reds can be problematic. Like if you have a large section of saturated red on the site, that can be problematic for people who've had a traumatic brain injury.
Yeah. So someone asked if you could share where your stats are from. Would you be able to give us a link for the slides that we could send out with the recording? I think I noticed most of them had some citations on them.
Yeah, so those stats came from WebAIM, webaim.org.
Mhm.
And they have a study that so I think they do the study every single year. And
In February, I think, right? Every February they scan websites.
Yeah, that probably sounds right. Yeah.
Your microphone sounds like it turned off or went low. I don't know if that's the case, but it's still okay. I just thought I'd
fine
mention it.
before, because when I just went to select it, it wasn't on the mic, and then I was like, oh shoot, maybe during the whole presentation my mic wasn't.
No, I think it just changed recently. All right. So Mark asked, why do some automated checkers claim to catch up to 50% of the issues? And is it some kind of marketing tactic to distort the truth?
Well, I can't speak for them, but I mean, like some automated checkers are better than others. Okay. And then there's also one automated checker might work really well and detect a lot of issues on one particular site, but it doesn't detect a lot of issues on another site. So just because it's like one checker works really great on one site, it does not mean it's going to work that great on another site. There's a lot of things that they just cannot check for too. So there's a lot of manual checking that has to be done. But yeah, I don't know where they come up with these statistics. I have no idea.
So the one I know of that has the highest is Axe by DQ, and they claim 50%. And AxeCon, if anyone's not familiar with that, is a really great free virtual conference on accessibility that's like, I can't remember if it's 2 or 3 days long. They might still have, I know they were moving some of the recordings from this year around, but they should be available somewhere for free. If you just look up AxeCon, AXE con. And I went to a session where they were talking about their tool, Axe Pro, which we use when we do some of our testing. And they were claiming that their 50% is based on data from using their tool to scan automated. And then they also did manual audits on these websites, because DQ is one of the major players in accessibility audits and remediation. I think they might do that too. But so they're like saying they manually audited thousands of websites and they documented how many problems on each page they found manually versus how many problems their scanner identified. And that's how they came up with 50%. They had tables and graphs and stuff. So maybe it's real and it's not just marketing spin. It's interesting, like people ask us that about our tool and I'm like, I can't tell you the number. I would love to one day have a number, and I would love for my number to be really close to, like, I don't know, 50% or more, right? But
right.
I don't give a number because I don't know how reliable that is. Maybe their number is reliable based upon how they're arriving at it. I'm not sure.
Right.
Because they have the volume of sites.
Right.
They're very, very large company. So they probably audit lots of sites every day.
And I think Tenon has a higher than average rate from what I've heard too.
Tenon, yeah. but I mean, they're the same way, right? So he uses his software and sells his software, but he also does audits. So probably, I think those ones, they pull it from maybe when their team audits something, they only find 50% more errors than when the software runs. I'm not sure. Let's see what other questions there were in the chat. Let's see. Ryan Bracey said he also had a client get sued a few months ago, ironically, while they were conducting an accessibility audit for them. That is frustrating. I'm curious to know, Ryan, if you don't mind unmuting real quick, did they have a accessibility statement on the website when they got sued? Or had they not put one up yet?
I don't believe they did. So in this case particularly, it's an older client of ours. And when accessibility started to become a bigger focus for my agency, we started reaching out to old clients, offering up audits and fixing mistakes we'd overlooked in the past. And we sold them on this. Obviously, companies are always very tenuous about spending money on things they don't fully understand. So we're doing this audit with them. We're going over recommendations, put a whole report together. And then we get these urgent emails all of a sudden from their legal team. Like, we just got sued. You guys were right. This is important. And we're like, yeah, we weren't just like trying to get money out of you. So
that probably helped them, though. I would bet that they could prove they were actually already in the process.
Yeah, it had actually been interesting. They're a pharmaceutical company. So they have two aspects of their business. We handled their corporate site, but they have like an investor relations site. And the investor relations site is the one that had the issue. So we had actually already done the audit and fixed their corporate site. And they were like, thank goodness you did that already. But now we need to reach out to this other company and get the other side of our business fixed. So it got us another kind of audit job off that too, which was nice. But
yeah, that's interesting. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah.
So Isla said, highly recommend an audit early in the build. This helps you switch gears early if needed and gives you a roadmap of things to focus on. This is how we get bigger contracts. Clients realize that you're really paying attention because you care, they care. That's sort of what you shared, Colleen.
Yeah, I mean, I even tell when anyone contacts me about like consulting alongside them to help them build the accessible site, I'm like, don't bring me in. Don't wait and bring me in at the end. In fact, don't even bring me in the middle of the development. Bring me into the design stage so I can review the design, because again, it's like, you don't want that client to revisit the design process twice, because that doesn't make you look good, and then that wastes their time and money. So always bring it up in the very beginning, as soon as you can, like in the design stage. And if you're designing branding, bring it up then. The earlier in the process, the cheaper it's going to be.
Yeah. Color choice matters so much.
Yes.
So on that note about why I asked that Ryan about accessibility statement. So do you know, Colleen, someone asked this question, is there a way to say on a website accessibility statement, quote, we're working on it, without increasing legal risks? And of course, I'll ask you this question by prefacing with, I'm not an attorney and you're not an attorney.
Correct.
Right? Okay.
Right.
And maybe Ryan has thoughts about this too, since he's been in that experience. But go ahead, Colleen, what do you think?
Yeah. So whenever someone contacts me about an audit, I'm like, get an accessibility statement up there right now, and then just change it later to say you've had the audit, when it was done, and to what standard the audit was done. But I mean, even if they're not planning on having an audit done right away, the accessibility statement, from what I've heard from lawyers, is that it can go a very long way in preventing issues, because typically what people are doing, whether they're greedy lawyers or they are legit plaintiffs, right? Because it doesn't matter the reason behind it, if it's ethical or not. If it happens, it happens. So then you can put that accessibility statement up there, because most of the people that are trolling the sites are just going and running like an automated checker and looking for issues. And if they don't see that you have an accessibility statement, then they think you just don't know anything about it. And so you can be a bigger target like that. But if you have an accessibility statement, again, from what I have heard from lawyers, is that it can help ward off those people who are looking for the people that don't know anything about it and aren't doing anything about it.
yeah, what we've started doing for our sites is just kind of template language. It's like, we're trying our best, we're keeping out, this stuff is constantly changing. if you see something that could make us better, here's a form you can fill out, and it comes directly to my team in-house. So
That's good.
that's that.
I mean, the other thing though too is you don't want to just slap an accessibility statement on the site and then don't do anything. Like you don't want to be like, okay, we care about accessibility, but we're not going to care enough to run an automated checker and look for some low hanging fruit, or we're not going to, do an audit, or, so, because there's a lot of sites that I've been on and it's like, is this a joke? I mean, you care about accessibility, but you clearly have major issues that anybody could find with an automated checker. Like, again, yellow on, white on yellow, white text on yellow background, so it's like, come on, don't just slap that on there. That makes you look like a hypocrite.
Yeah, I think so I've heard the same thing from attorneys that you've heard, that having a statement and even pointing out areas that
Yes.
you're deficient.
Yes.
And we do a lot of work with universities, and some of them will literally say, like, we are currently working on PDF remediation, because they know they've got like hundreds of PDFs, thousands of PDFs, right? And they'll point it out. But I think what Ryan's point is, it's really helpful to have a way for them to contact you. We tend to not recommend a form, because sometimes if you have problems with your form software, it's not set up right, then that causes an accessibility problem. So we are like, give them a phone number and give them an email, and then they can choose what works best for them. And we don't even obscure the email address. It's straight up linked. And so that it's like as easy as possible for someone to like send an email saying, I need help, or call, whatever their preference might be. So Dave had a question. Is there any web browser or plugin that makes it easy for people with disabilities to adjust the colors for themselves if they need light yellow background with black text?
Yeah, there are some. So some people might be browsing in high contrast mode. Like if they're using Windows, they might always be browsing in high contrast mode. And so they may or may not encounter some issues with that. There are a lot of issues that can happen in high contrast mode though, when things aren't coded properly. But like on my site, I've got just a very, it's the WP Accessibility Helper, or it's WP Accessibility. I always confuse the two. It's one of them. And I disable all of the options other than toggling the font size and high contrast mode, because my site is, well, I'm not done with the accessibility. There's still stuff I'm working on, but there's only so many hours in the day. And I'm not a PHP person. Like I can do certain things, I can't do other things. So the site is accessible, and so it's not like adding functionality by adding this plugin. It's just making it convenient for people who don't use assistive technology, and they may not know that they can, use high contrast mode on their operating system or with a Chrome extension, for example, or they may not know that they can toggle the font size in the browser. So it's really for convenience of people that aren't using that assistive technology, to just give them those options right there. It's just those two options. So there are different plugins that do that, that you can install. But again, like I just only have those two little tiny things activated, because the rest of them are just redundant from what I've already built into the site. And there's an extension. So it's Funkify, and I'm trying to remember if it does anything like that, but Funkify is an extension you can install like for testing, and you can change it to like a certain visual disabilities or motor disabilities. And it will kind of like demo how somebody with that kind of disability is able to get around that web page. So it kind of demonstrates for you like what they're seeing or how things work for them from a mechanical standpoint. So that could be something you could look at too.
Yeah, I think, it's interesting. I really want to try and get someone. I've been thinking about, I need to go get someone from like 10 Up to come talk about how, because they added the color contrast and the font size toggle right to whitehouse.gov when they launched that earlier this year. And a bunch of people were talking about that. And I always wonder, like, how much is that used? But there is an audience that they don't know yet, that there's things they can do in their browser.
Right.
To make it fixed on every website. So they might use those tools. So yeah, it's interesting.
And some people confuse them with an overlay, which they're not. They're not an overlay at all. Because I've gotten questions about that. Like, oh, well, that looks like an overlay. It's not an overlay, because an overlay is when you're installing a line. We didn't even get it. That's a whole nother topic that you and I could get into. but those drive me crazy. But it overlays when they say, oh, you just install this one line of JavaScript on your site and poof, your site's accessible. But it isn't, because it can't actually change the underlying code on your site. And it actually causes more accessibility issues. So this is a totally different kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing I will say with those, and there's a variety of them on WordPress.org, the one that you're talking about, WP Accessibility, Joe Dolson developed that one. He spoke a couple meetups ago. I can't remember when exactly, but you can find the recap, and he talked about that plugin and shared some of the features and things. And with all of them, even his, and like he talked about this in the meetup, like you do really need to test it, because there's some possibility that if you are not adding, like if text is being added in a funky way, that the contrast switch, right? Going to high contrast might miss it or something like that. So
I've seen that.
Plugins, if you do add them to your website, I think, like I always tell our clients, like it's really important that you turn it on and go through tons of pages on your website to make sure that nothing's being missed.
Yeah, I've seen that happen, what you just mentioned. Yes.
Yeah. Someone else asked, let's see.
I think it's when there's a background image, text over a background image, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, that can cause problems. Or, I mean, this is its whole other accessibility issue, but they usually can't change placeholder text. So if you have forms that don't have labels, visible labels, they could have labels for screen readers. If they don't have visible labels and you're using placeholder text, and then toggle high contrast mode. This is what I've seen. The background is black and the placeholder text is like dark gray or black. So now no one knows what they're supposed to put in there. So obviously there's multiple accessibility issues happening in that scenario, but let's see. Sorry, I'm looking back through. Okay, so can you talk a little bit about PDF remediation? Because I know this is like an area of expertise for you. I know almost nothing about it. Like I've read the Adobe help docs, but some people are asking, Angela's asking, what is PDF remediation? What happens with PDFs that are issues? I know you could probably talk about this whole thing for an hour, but
or more. I'm going to be presenting on some of it at Creative Pro again too.
Okay.
Yeah. So, okay. So document remediation is when you have to make a document accessible, and it is always cheaper and easier to do that when you are working with a source file. So when people come to me for this work, I have a lot of creative agencies that come to me and they say, look, here's our InDesign files, just make them accessible. And it's kind of like handing off a website at the end and going, just make it accessible. And it's like, no, but I mean, I can do it, but it's like, involve me in the beginning, it's cheaper. But, so what happens is like, well, the people specialize in different types of documents. I don't work in Word. I don't work in PowerPoint. I work in InDesign and PDF. So the foundation of an accessible document is tags, which is like the HTML code is for accessible websites. That's the foundation. If you can't export a tagged PDF, like Affinity Publisher, I actually just did a podcast on this yesterday. Affinity Publisher cannot export to a tagged PDF. So you cannot use that for accessibility. So, I mean, if you want to do a lot of work in the PDF, but that's never good.
That's like Google Docs. That's my biggest pain point. We used to make everything in Google Docs and we can't because the PDFs are not tagged.
Have you tried Grackle Docs has that?
It does some stuff, but yeah, not fully. You still have to try and fix it in Adobe.
Oh, yeah. Anything that you have to do in the PDF is always worse because it's not just more costly, but like if you have to like InDesign, if I'm doing something in InDesign, like I can get like 95% of the work done in InDesign because InDesign can only do so much, right? It doesn't do everything. So it's not like, and a lot of designers think I'm just going to export from InDesign to a tagged PDF and poof, my PDF is accessible. And that's not the case. Or that if it passes the Acrobat accessibility checker, that document is, it has passed accessibility, but that's not the case either because it's the same with automated checkers on a website. It cannot check for every single thing. So there's other checking. There's a lot of manual checking that still has to be done, but there's still a lot of work that, like, even if you get all the way that you can in, say, InDesign, and then you make that PDF, you still have to go in and you have to, for instance, do what's called scoping tables, which is also a thing with websites, but scoping tables is done very differently in documents. So there's a lot of like manual work that has to be done. And so you don't want to have to go back and re-export a file and redo the PDF work that you just did. I mean, I had a situation once where I think I did 20 hours of work in the PDF and I had to go back to InDesign for something. So you try not to do that. It's always easier to start with the source file, get everything done that you can there, and then do what you have to do in the PDF, and then do the testing and like spot checking with a screen reader, things like that. But like I said, some people do Word document remediation, some people do PowerPoint. Everything ends up as a PDF, and a PDF always comes from somewhere else. And that's where you have to start, with the somewhere else, whatever program it originated. Now, that's not to say though, like your clients can have PDFs on their website that have to be remediated, and they may not have access to a source file, or they can't find it. That doesn't mean the PDF still can't be remediated. It can, it's just a lot more work to do it that way.
And you're talking about some specific examples for people who don't know. So when you said scoping tables, that's like making sure that there's headers on the
Yes.
table or in the rows, wherever, so that it will read out properly. And then I'm thinking like alt tags on images, using headings, right? Not
Mhm.
everything should be in a paragraph block, just like you would on a website, right? A lot of it is
Right.
the same.
Right. So the approach from a theoretical standpoint is the same, but the way that it is done, the mechanical way that it is done, is different. It's very different. Like with document remediation, we don't when we want a screen reader to ignore an image, we actually call it artifacting. So there's some different terms there. And then, so it's not like just, it's like null, it's the equivalent of null alt text on an image on the web, but we call it artifacting. So we do that so it gets ignored. What else was I going to say about that? Yeah, so we don't have as many tags, and we have some slightly different tags with document remediation. HTML, there's a whole lot more tags. So there's that. But like, it's still like, you're still using WCAG, even though it's Web Content Accessibility Guidelines that WCAG stands for. You're still using those principles. They still apply to any form of electronic technology, which is documents. So you're still applying those same principles, and you're still, like Amber said, formatting the headings, making sure that headings aren't used for body text, and that if you've got a list, it's a list. It's not a bunch of paragraphs, things like that. You're still using those same types of practices. Yeah.
I mean, that's so helpful. This is one area that is a huge pain point for us, because we don't, it's like we have to spend a lot of time in InDesign. I keep thinking I need to just like have someone else do my PDFs. I mean, mostly we avoid PDFs, but every once in a while. So okay. Dave asked, can nonprofits get sued for having an inaccessible website?
Oh yeah.
So that would be under the ADA, or
not necessarily
under
it could
Section
be
508, right? If they had a federal grant.
Yes, exactly. And I've had clients that come to me with federal grant money, so they fall under Section 508. But everybody still comes to me and says it's ADA compliance. And I'm like, it's really not, but that's what they just call it when they mean accessible. So just because a client comes to you and said, we need to be ADA compliant, it doesn't mean they actually need to abide by the ADA. Sometimes they just don't know, and they just say that. But sometimes it could be the ADA for sure that they do need to comply with. But yeah, a lot of the people that come to me, a lot of the times it's Section 508. Oh, I got a federal grant. And so, but it's still WCAG that you're following, because the laws are different, but the laws are usually telling you to follow the same, WCAG standards.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of examples of nonprofits that have been sued. The only ones that come to mind for me are like private schools. So private, so they're not getting federal funds, so it is under ADA that the lawsuit was made, but I'm not sure if I have good examples. I always like to refer people to Lainey Feingold.
Yeah.
She has a blog called, her business is lflegal.com. And she's an attorney who's been practicing in this area for, I don't know, like 30 years or something. And she does legal updates. And so if you're super interested in legal and you want the real, the expert opinion, that's where I'm like, go read her stuff. So, yeah. And on that note, whether or not we can give it, do you think, this is a question, do you think the high contrast mode in the operating system gives companies a get out of jail card if that fixes the accessibility problems on their website?
Can you say that one again?
The question is, the only problems are contrast.
So what is the question again?
Does the high contrast mode in the operating system give companies a quote, get out of jail card if that fixes the accessibility problems on their website?
Absolutely not, because that that's, first of all, that's assuming that, like you said, that's assuming that's the only issue, but there's so many other types of disabilities that aren't even visual related. So no, 100% no.
I think too, like, I think the spirit of that question sort of, or the thought behind that, which I could totally see companies thinking this is, it like requires the person with disabilities to find the technology to make the thing work for them. And so it's kind of putting the onus on the person with disabilities instead of the company, because they might not know about high contrast mode in their browser. So is it, their own fault that a low contrast website doesn't work? Right. So I kind of feel like the onus should be on the company, not on the individual, as long as it's reasonable, right? We always say reasonable accommodation, and most of these things are reasonable. And so,
right. Well, and then what you're saying about the onus being on the company, that's also like, just because you're somebody like a third party developed a plugin that you added to your site, it doesn't mean, oh, well, it's their responsibility for this to be accessible. If you've slapped that onto your site, it's now your problem. You have to address that if it's not accessible.
Yeah.
You can't just be like, oh, well, I installed this form plugin and my forms aren't accessible, but it's not my fault.
All right. Eve's wondering what % of website accessibility issues can be solved with proper semantics? Like,
oh,
HTML
wow.
semantics?
A lot. I don't know an exact percentage. I would say a lot of them. Wouldn't you say that? I mean, I'd probably say.
Yeah, I feel like I need to get a t-shirt that's like, everything shouldn't be a div.
Oh my gosh. Yes.
That's like, but I really do feel like having, because even having semantic HTML, back to your point in your talk when you were talking about ARIA, and you were saying a website doesn't have to have ARIA to be accessible. But ARIA was actually created to make elements that don't really follow semantic HTML accessible. So like buttons that are made out of divs and then turned into buttons with JavaScript or something like that, right? Then you label them with ARIA. But it's like, it'd be so much better if they were using a button tag.
Right. It's like you took all these extra steps and did all this extra work to make a button accessible when all you had to do was use the button tag, the native button tag that has all of that functionality inherently built in.
Yeah. Well, we are almost to time. So I wanted to see if anybody else has any questions or comments or thoughts. You're also more than welcome to unmute and speak if that works better for you. You don't have to put them in the chat. But real quick, again, Colleen, if anybody wants to follow up with you, what's the best way to get a hold of you?
Well, I have a Facebook group called Design Domination that they could join. My email address is colleen@creative-boost.com. And my website is creative-boost.com. On the consulting side of things, where we actually do the work, the accessibility work, is GratzerGraphics.com. So I can also be reached there. And you can connect with me on LinkedIn.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And I think Angela posted that she wants you to come speak at their Boulder WordPress meetup.
Oh.
So you two should connect.
Yeah, definitely reach out to me, Angela.
Well, thank you, everybody. Just as a quick reminder, our next meetup will be on a Monday evening. It's on the 3rd Monday. And of course, I've made my slides go away, but I'll grab it real quick. So the date is Monday, October 18th at 5 p.m. Pacific time. If you live in Pacific, that's 7 Central or 10 a.m. in Australia, and 5 a.m. if you're a super morning person or 5:30 a.m. if you're a super morning person in India. And that will be Nick Croft from Reactive speaking about best practices for screen reader text. And we're going to get to see some code, which will be fun. So thank you, everybody. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you all for attending. I mean, like I always say, I love talking about accessibility, and it's nice to have all these people show up and want to talk about it too. So,
well, you got to come back for more meetups.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah.
All right.
Absolutely.
Thanks, everybody. Have
Thank you so
good
much.
rest of the day.
Thank you.